morning, church. Morning. For about 20 years, I worked with a gentleman who grew up in northern Wisconsin. And he would ask me occasionally, have you been to Wisconsin yet? And I had never been in the state of Wisconsin until Thursday night about midnight when the plane landed. Yesterday, I sent him a text after Bailey had taken me on a tour through Lambeau Field. I sent him a picture of me in the press box, and I said, guess where I am? And his reply was, are you going to come home, or are you just going to send for your wife? I have to say, you live in a beautiful place, and it has been a joy for me to be here for a few days. I'm very thankful for the opportunity to have been with a number of you yesterday to talk about leadership. Leadership is something I'm passionate about. I've spent most of my career, my business career, as a leader, and about a year ago, I began to seriously consider my future and what I wanted to do as I began approaching retirement age, and I've been in business largely in IT and project management for most of my career for 40 plus years. And I began to think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. And the work that I had been doing just didn't seem quite as fulfilling. And I felt a call to do what I'm doing today, this weekend. And that is contributing to the growth of the church and doing my small part in what I can do to help develop leaders, to help develop the growth within the church, and do what I can to help spread the word of Jesus Christ. My father and I have worked together. Dad has been the primary worker with the church in Cluj, Romania since the mid-90s. And Dad'll be 86 in a few weeks, and I began to also grow concerned about what was going to happen with that work. And so I have, as of the first of this year, stepped into mission work and leadership consultation with churches on a full-time basis. Looking forward to that. I'm not the kind of guy that wanted to just retire and put my feet up and not contribute. And so I'm looking forward to that. I so appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to be here with you this weekend. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know some of you. Some of you I want to get to know better today. Leadership. What do we need? And as I thought about a sermon that was a companion to the leadership workshop that we went through yesterday, I began thinking about what do we in the church need in terms of leadership from our elders, and consequently, what do elders need from the church? And I know that this church is considering your future. You're considering leadership in the future, and there's some thought being given to the selection of elders in the future. And so I wanted to share some things with you this morning about what leadership looks like and what we need from leaders as a church, and what we need from leaders, what the leaders need from us. We're going to begin in Matthew chapter 9. I'm going to try to work this technology. There we go. I spent 40 years working in technology, and my ability to mess things up knows no bounds. And so I'm going to, if something goes wrong, I'm going to look in the corner back there. What the flock needs from shepherds. We're going to begin there. Matthew chapter 9 and verses 35 and 36. This is a beautiful passage as Jesus is beginning his ministry. And in chapter 10, he's about to send his disciples off on what is sometimes referred to as the limited commission. And this is recorded for us here as he does his work, and he's moving through the countryside, and he's preaching, he's teaching, healing the sick. It mentions there in Matthew chapter 9, every sickness and every disease among the people. Jesus was someone who was doing what he could to demonstrate compassion. Compassion. God intended for elders to be men of some age, of some level of experience. He through the Spirit and what we read in the New Testament, the qualifications that are provided for us in Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus, we learn that men should have some experience. They should have been individuals who have been there and done that. They've experienced life. And that's important as leaders of a flock, because there will come a time, inevitably, when someone within the congregation needs compassion. They're hurting. They've made a mistake. They've suffered a loss. A home has been broken. So many different things that we can think of where compassion is needed from an elder. The elders are men who understand what you're going through, who understand the pain that you feel. And so I love the imagery in John chapter 10 when Jesus is talking about himself as a shepherd, as the good shepherd. And he mentions there that, you know, a hired hand doesn't have the same investment with a flock as the individual who is responsible, who is the shepherd, the individual who is accountable for the well-being of that flock. The hired hand, he uses the analogy of the hired hand. When the wolf shows up, they run away. They're going to think about themselves and they're going to leave. The shepherd stays there. The shepherd has the responsibility to care for the flock and to watch over them and love them. The imagery in Matthew chapter 18, as Jesus talks about the shepherd leaving the 99 and going after that one. I can tell you, I've had experience on both sides of that equation. Having served as an elder for about 10 years or so, there were times when we needed to go after that one. We needed to go after that individual who had fallen away, who had fallen into sin, or who had suffered a terrible mistake and was lost. And there's been times in my life when I'm the one that someone needed to come get. Okay, there have been times in my life when I'm the one who needed that compassion shown toward me, and I'm grateful for Christians, for elders who showed that compassion toward me. The flock needs truth. When I was I guess I was in my mid-20s, there was an older gentleman in the congregation there in Conway where I live. He was approaching the age of 100. I think he was 98 or 99 when I came to know him. And what really fascinated me about him, by the way, he lived to be 102. He had served as an elder for over 50 years in the congregation that we called home at that point. And I found out that he knew my great-grandfather, who was a preacher in that area, who died in 1920. And Henry had come to know my great-grandfather when he was in his late teens. And he remembered him well. And so it was fascinating to me to go and sit on Henry's front porch. Now, this is a gentleman that's in his late 90s, and it was in the summertime, and it was pretty warm. It seemed like it was early summer, and he would sit out there on his front porch with the sun pouring in, and I would almost have to just take my shirt off to survive, because he needed that heat. He needed that warmth sitting out there on that porch. So I'd go over and I'd sit and sweat and visit with Henry. And occasionally he would nod off. Mid-conversation, his chin would hit his chest, and he'd just go to sleep. And one day I was visiting with him, and we were talking about some things that were going on in the world and going on in the church, and problems that existed at that time. And all of a sudden, Henry's chin went down, and he just sat there for a few seconds. And I thought, well, maybe that's my cue to leave. And all of a sudden, he threw his head back and he said, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel together at Shechem. And I said, okay. And then he kept going. And what fascinated me, it fascinates me to this day, when I think about it and talk about it, I get chills. He quoted the entire 24th chapter of the book of Joshua at 99 years old without missing a beat. And his point was, there's a lot of trouble in the world, but make the right choice. Make the right choice. Love the truth. And as I think about this verse here, Joshua chapter, these two verses, Joshua chapter 24, Joshua's telling Israel, love the truth. Love the Lord. Serve him in sincerity. Put him first. Put away the gods of your fathers, the gods of that land. And then he goes on to say, in a great example of servant leadership, choose yourself what you're going to do this day, but for me and mine, we're going to follow the Lord. And I thought to myself, what a great example I just experienced. Hearing this 99-year-old man quote a chapter like that from his heart, being a good example to me as from his viewpoint, a boy. And I'm so grateful for that experience. This postmodern world that we live in, truth is, the world tells us truth doesn't exist. It's not out there. It doesn't, everything is gray. Everything is subjective. Folks, that's the world lying to us. There is truth. It does exist. There are things that are black and white where that contrast exists. Proverbs chapter 23, verse 23 says, buy the truth and do not sell it. Elders must love the truth, and they must model the truth, just like Henry modeled the truth to me, and just like Joshua did for the nation of Israel. Elders must provide trust, candor, and positive reinforcement. In this passage, there's a wide range of emotions that are talked about, even things like anger and bitterness. Paul is giving the Ephesian church direction about how to behave them, how to behave, how to conduct themselves. And he's very candid about that as he's giving them direction. You know, if you really want candor, ask a question of a 3-year-old. Okay? I picked my 3-year-old granddaughter up. She's 18, graduated a few days ago. She's headed off to Hardy next fall. My wife and her are on a girl trip this weekend, and I'm a little bit sad I'm not with her, but I'm glad I'm here. I picked her up one time, she was about 3, and I was trying to give her a kiss on the cheek, and she kept moving her head around. I said, what are you doing? And she said, Poppy, your breath stinks. And sometimes that's exactly the candor that's needed in some situations. Candor is needed sometimes. When we're struggling as Christians, when leaders look at the flock, sometimes people need direction. Now that candor must be shared with love. It must be shared in a gentle way. It must be shared with kindness. But sometimes we need that. We need that positive reinforcement. My wife is she and I are very different in some ways. We're just alike in other ways, like any married couple, I suppose. But one of the hardest things that we've had to figure out in our 40 plus years of marriage is I'm the kind of guy that needs positive reinforcement. I need somebody to say, hey, you did a good job with that. Hey, you did well today. I like the way you did that. My wife was not equipped with that tool in her toolkit. And so we've had to learn, and she's had to learn to recognize sometimes she has to do something that feels weird to her, feels uncomfortable to her, may feel unneeded. And she's, conversely, she's not the kind of individual that needs that kind of reinforcement. But I give it to her anyway. And we've grown closer in that respect over 4 decades together. And Christians need positive reinforcement. They need candor. They need honesty and trust from their elders. I love a quote that I found recently by Adlai Stevenson. It says, "Candor disarms paranoia." Candor disarms paranoia. And I like that. I like the fact that open communication, it leaves little doubt. It leaves all the things that exist in our minds when we communicate with candor and honesty, those things go away. The flock needs delegation and freedom. Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20, and over in Mark chapter 16, Jesus looks out at 12 men and says, go. Go into all the world. He spent a year and a half working with those same 12 men. And really, I think you can see, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday during the workshop, I think you can see some exasperation from Jesus at times because he wonders, are these guys ready? You hear him say things like, haven't you seen this? Haven't you seen what I've done as a minister to others? But they were the 12 he had prepared. He'd spent 18 or so months, maybe a little less than that, preparing them to be the ones to take the gospel to the world. I can't imagine being one of those 12 men. Where would you begin? Where would you start? Of course, they started in Jerusalem. But by the end of their lives, they had taken the gospel of Jesus to all of the known world, the Roman Empire. From the UK, from Great Britain to India. Those 12 men had worked and labored and taken the good news of Christ. And what a great example they are to us. Over in Acts chapter 6, there's a great example of the apostles being overwhelmed with work. The church had just been established in Jerusalem. Thousands were converted. Some of those people who were converted and had remained in Jerusalem lived elsewhere. And there was great need. There was a great opportunity for service. And the apostles were overwhelmed. And they chose those men to delegate some of that work to, and to give it to them and empower them to do the work. Elders need to do that. Not only does that ease their burden, but it develops leaders for the future. One of the most important roles that current elders have is a succession plan, is making sure that there are men qualified and prepared and ready behind them to step in their shoes and take on those responsibilities. And lastly, what the flock needs from shepherds is vision and hope. Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 1, the Hebrew writer defines faith for us as the substance of things hoped for. We live in a world where hope, in some cases, doesn't exist. You turn on the news and everything is bad. Everything's out of control. Everything's negative. And if you're like me, and some of you probably are, you just turn it off. You just don't worry about it. Tune out the noise, leave it behind. Because the world today is overwhelming us with despair, with worry, with concern. What we need today, folks, is hope. And what we have as Christians, people of faith, as defined by the Hebrew writer there in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 1, we have hope. beyond this world, beyond all of the negativity that seems to overwhelm us from day to day. My good friend in North Little Rock, he's a preacher at our sponsoring congregation, Levy, in North Little Rock, wrote a book last year about this time called God, Government, and Us. And he wrote it specifically because of the election that was happening last year. And throughout the book, Danny says over and over and over, we are not from here. We're not from here. Which means when we're overwhelmed with concern about what's going on in the world, what's going on in our nation, in our community, it does us some good sometimes to realize we're not from here. We're only here for a while. We're sojourners in this life, in a temporary place, looking toward a home where hope exists and peace and love last forever. Isn't that a great thought? When you feel overwhelmed by the world, when you feel overwhelmed by what's going on and the world seems to be falling apart, literally and figuratively, just remember, we're not from here. We're not from here. We're here for a while. We're going home to be with God and with His Son soon. Now, what do shepherds need from the flock? I'm going to begin here with this. Hebrews chapter 13. Remember those who rule over you, who have spoken the word of God to you, whose faith follow, considering the outcome of their conduct. Considering the outcome of their conduct. I can tell you from experience, few things are as comforting to an elder as watching the flock live good lives. You learn to appreciate those individuals who just live a good life, who are present in worship, Hebrews 10:25, who gather together at every opportunity to be together, to edify one another, support one another, encourage each other. I love what Paul told Timothy, 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God. Here's a father, in a sense, talking to a young man whom he considered as his son in the faith, and telling him, present yourself approved to God. Live your lives in a godly way. Watch your conduct. Watch what you say. Live an honorable life. For elders, and there's some in the room here who have served in the elders in the past and are serving today, and they will tell you how good it is to watch a life well lived by the flock. What shepherds need from the flock is commitment and consistency. I mentioned Hebrews 10:25. Edifying one another, building one another up, and being together. Being together. I mentioned the church in Romania that my father and I worked with. We had to have a conversation recently. The preacher and his wife who lived there, he's in his mid-40s. She just turned 40. They have 3 girls that are 14, 12, and 8. And what we had to talk to them about recently was the church was meeting too often. They were meeting too often. And the girls were suffering from that. The girls felt like that church was meeting 6 days out of the week. They'd have a prayer service on Friday night. They met for singing and songs on Wednesday night. They met for prayer service on Tuesday night. They worshiped on Sunday. And as Dad and I had been there with them for a few weeks in October, we began to realize these girls need their mom and dad. They need some family time. They need some time to themselves. And that was hard for them because they love being with their spiritual family. Serena even told me, the wife, she said, I told her family needed her attention, and she said, that's what I'm doing. I'm giving my family my attention, my spiritual family. It's a good thing when a spiritual family is together. They love each other. They care about one another. And that's a great thing. And that's what the Hebrew writer was encouraging us to do. 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 10 through 11. In that passage, Peter says, as each one has received a gift, minister it to one another. Minister it to one another. Share your gifts. Share your gifts. Be committed. Be consistent. Be there for each other. I love the quote, long-term consistency trumps short-term intensity. Long-term consistency trumps short-term intensity. Okay? Be there for each other. Be consistent. Follow through with commitments that you make. Another thing that shepherds need from the flock is respect and kindness. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12 there. Therefore, whatever you want men to do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Did you know that there's only one concept that is a part of every religion known to man across the globe? Okay? You can look at any religion in the world, any religion that man has devised or that Christianity that we have faith in and follow. There's only one concept that's consistent across all of those, and it's the golden rule. Treat people like you want to be treated. Be kind to one another. Whatever you want men to do to you, do to them. These are traits that are absolutely foreign in our culture today. I got to tell you about this. I was driving down the road between Conway and another little town I grew up in, about 15 miles apart. And there was a vehicle behind me the driver was driving as aggressively as he possibly could. And I didn't know what to do. I'm trying to just stay out of his way. So I'm pulling over to the side and staying out, trying my best to stay out of his way. And he pulled up beside me at a red light. And he began to roll his window down, and I didn't know what he was going to say, but I rolled my window down just a bit. And he began to curse at me. And to my surprise, his wife, I assume it was his wife, the woman sitting in the car with him, reached over and slapped him so hard that his glasses came off. And she looked around him at me and said, I apologize. I've been having to live with this guy for 50 years. I just rolled my window up. That's way more than I needed to know. But we live in a world where at times that's the norm. There's kindness and respect, and love doesn't exist. And I'm going to tell you this as someone who has served as an elder, and all this that I'm sharing with you today, I'm speaking as someone who is an outsider. I'm speaking to someone who has experienced what it is to be a member of the flock, a follower, and I've been one of those individuals who leads. And so I'm here just to give you some advice. I'm speaking in general terms. I'm not pointing anything at anybody in this audience. Elders need kindness. They need respect. They need people to show appreciation for them. Everybody needs that, but it's compounded so for those who are in positions of leadership. Think about political leadership today, leadership in our country, and how they're treated. And there's not much respect. There's not much kindness. And I don't care which side of the political aisle you fall on. That's true either side. Be different. As a Christian, be different. Don't allow yourself to fall into that trap of harshness, of name calling, of blame assignment, of all those things that surround us in our world. Kindness, engagement, communication is appreciated by elders. Keep that in mind as you move forward as a congregation. Shepherds need trust from the flock. This passage here in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17, talking about the elders being worthy of double honor. They labor. They labor. And I'm going to tell you, from experience, it's work. It's work. There are late nights. There are times when you meet with people that you don't know what to do for them. You don't know how to help them. You're just there to comfort them, to console them, to give them direction, to heal, help them heal. Elders need trust. My daughter called me a few weeks ago. She and her husband and another few couples are heavily involved in working with the youth in the congregation where they call home. And the elders had made some decisions that were frustrating them. They weren't mad, they weren't upset, but she called me one morning just a bit. And I listened and listened and listened. She really wanted to talk, and I let her talk it out. And then I tried to be gentle, and I said, here's something you need to remember. They're accountable for all 500, 600, 700 souls in that congregation, not just a handful that you're concerned about. And there was a long pause, and I thought, well, I hurt her feelings. Took me right back to when she was in the 8th grade, and I'd hurt her feelings every day. And except this time, she said, Dad, you're right. Dad, you're right. I needed that perspective. I'm glad I called you. I needed that perspective. Trust them. You can't always know why elders make a decision that they make. You can't always understand what motivates them to make a call. When I was about 15 or 16, I walked through the living room one night. My dad was sitting in his recliner, and I said, Dad, I'm going to town with some buddies. He said, you got to understand, my dad's 6'4", but he couldn't be loud when he wanted to be. And he said, nope. I thought, that's it? He said, no, you're not going. Fast forward about 40 or 50 years, and we were driving down the road, driving toward Atlanta. And I said, Dad, you remember one night when I was about 15 or 16, and I walked in the living room and told you I was going to town with some buddies, and you said, nope. And you didn't tell me why, and he said, yeah. And I said, what is the deal there? And he said, son, what you don't know is one of my older brothers had tried to take his life that afternoon. He was in the hospital, and we didn't know if he'd live. And the last thing I want to worry about, if I lost my brother, was having to track you down and let you know. And I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to explain that to you, but I had a good reason for saying no. And here I was, an old gray-headed man learning. Yeah, learning from my dad. Trust. Trust your elders. You may not always have the information. They may not always be able to give you all the information, but trust them anyway. And then lastly, how am I doing on time? I'm late, aren't I? Recognize the burden. Recognize the burden. Exodus chapter 18, Moses is making decisions for an immense number of people. 12 tribes of Israel. Depending on who you believe, there may have been hundreds of thousands or even over 1 million people out there wandering around in the desert, Moses providing leadership, and he's doing it all. And his father-in-law says, you're going to kill yourself. Well, I said it that way. He said, you're working yourself to death. Delegate. Delegate. And he did. What I want us to remember today as a flock is that your elders need you to recognize the burden. Recognize the long nights. Recognize the sacrifices that are made by them. And by the way, the sacrifices that are made by their wives and sometimes their children in order to be the shepherd that they need to be. Recognize that burden. Defend them. Defend them. There will be times when someone wants to complain to you about an elder, defend them. Be on their side and trust them. We said a lot this morning about trust, about truth, about commitment, about living honorably. There may be someone present here today who wishes to make their life right with God. You may be here and you know what it takes to become a Christian. You may believe in Christ as the Son of God who came to this earth, lived a life as an example for us, and died for our sins. Died as a sacrifice for our sins. You may know that, and you haven't acted on it. The schedule today is busy, but nothing is more important than if you are here today and you want to become a Christian, we'll make that happen. That's the most important thing that can be done today. If you're here and you need to make something right in your life, if you need help, you need encouragement of the brethren here, then let us know as we stand and sing.